All right, well, hello, this is Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, John B9 Bentavania, and welcome to another episode of the Perigee podcast, episode number 38. I'm here at the Air and Space Forces Association Air and Space and Cyber Conference with some of my teammates to discuss Resolute Space 2025. So to start off, what I'd like to do is please have our guests introduce themselves, and we'll start here in the room. Let us know who you are, where you currently work, and if you could tell us what was your role in Resolute Space 2025.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Tech Sergeant Ashlyn Tran, and I am the NCO in charge of mission planning at the 66th Cyber Warfare Squadron in Schriever Space Force Base. For Resolute Space, I was the sole cyber planner, and I had more of a hand in the master scenario events and making sure everything was on track.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it, and welcome. I'm really interested to hear what your experience was and what you went through for Resolute Space, so thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, and then we have some guests that are on the phone because they're not physically with us here. We have a guest from Colorado, so I'll let the guests from Colorado introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Chief. My name is Master Sergeant Jeff Matheny. I am the Flight Chief of Mission Delta 3's S-37 Directorate, Exercise and War Games, and I was a part of the Exercise Control Group. The Exercise Control Group was responsible for all the behind-the-scenes planning and working that made Resolute Space fantastic for the players.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Now, we have a few individuals who are in a hardship location that also dialed in. I know it's early in the morning there, but they're out in Hawaii. So I would ask start off with Colonel Steingold, if you can introduce yourself and tell us where you're working and what you did for Resolute Space.
Good morning, Chief, and thank you for having me. Again, my name is Colonel Jay Steingold. I am currently in Hawaii at Space Forces Indo-Pacific as the Deputy Commander, and my previous role was as Commander of Delta 11. I served as the Exercise Resolute Space Exercise Director.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
And I'll jump straight in if you like, Chief. Group Captain Daryl May. So I'm in the same location. It is a hardship posting. So I'm an Australian who's embedded over here, and I'm also a Deputy Commander. For the exercise, I was the Space Force Indo-Pac Deputy Commander. In my previous life, I came from a similar role in Australia for the last 3 years. So well placed to be in this position. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. So if we could, and as the exercise director, Colonel Steingold, if you could maybe just give us a kind of a brief overview. What was Resolute Space for maybe some of us who are listening that aren't as familiar with kind of what that was? If you just give a quick overview.
Absolutely, Chief. Exercise Resolute Space was the United States Space Force's contribution to the overarching department-wide exercise for the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Space Force. And we work side by side with our U.S. Air Force partners across the U.S. Indo-Pacific, as well as in, from, and through space to execute training and tactics and techniques and procedures development for our forces in this AOR and in space.
And I think there was like 700 participants, I think, from the Space Force that took part. I think it was like 9 worldwide locations, right? Is that kind of what the footprint was, maybe? Absolutely
correct, Chief. We had estimated over 700 Guardians participating in this exercise at those locations across the globe in a distributed manner. And we spanned all of the mission areas for the United States Space Force that included everything from cyber warfare, electromagnetic spectrum warfare, orbital warfare, our bread and butter in the space domain, and specifically position, navigation, and timing, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, satellite communications, as well as environmental monitoring and other spacecraft operations. So we had the wide gambit of all mission areas associated with the United States Space Force's contribution to this DLE, or department level large scale exercise.
That is a wide variety of mission areas and effects that the Space Force brings to make the joint force more lethal, but also what we provide the president as independent options as well as a service ourselves. So with all those different types of capabilities, and you're playing in the exercise, Sergeant Tran, if I could ask, right? So there was live, there was virtual, there was simulated. In the planning on the cyber side, can you talk about when you went through that? How much of it was on the live range? Was there simulation? What did that look like?
Yes, sir. So cyber, this was unique. So most of the exercises that we have done thus far, is more of at the tactical level. So whenever we are at our home units, we're logging into a range and we have our simulated environments that replicate a lot of our space capabilities and what the networks actually look like. For this iteration, it was at the operational level. So we were looking at more of the synthetic side of giving these injects and saying, how would you be able to communicate this vulnerability and based off of the cyber intel that we're getting for these very sophisticated, advanced, persistent threats, and be able to articulate that to our commanders and operators. It was more of that level for us, as we had about 8 cyber war planners from each of their cyber squadrons out at SF5 themselves with, they were amongst about 100, I believe, augmentees. And so though we didn't use the range this time, hopefully in the future we will.
Yeah, I think that was one of the key, objectives from Resolute Space this time was this was the first time at this mass scale, right, as a service that we participated in this level of exercise. But like most other things that we're doing, it's what are we learning, right? In addition, one of the objectives is what are we going to take back to implement into the next evolution of whatever the exercise that we get a chance to play into. And so I'm glad you had a chance to kind of, experience that and all those lessons learned, right? So next time, hopefully, we have a more mature, right, OTTI, right, Operational Test and Training Infrastructure. We come back and provide, hopefully you had a chance to provide input into what are we investing in, what does that look like to allow us to do the exercises at the level and the fidelity that we have to.
Absolutely.
So that was on the cyber side. So, hey, Jeff, for you, coming out of Delta 3, we talk about the electromagnetic spectrum and some of the things that you were planning. Can you give us a little breakdown on how you were doing, live, virtual, simulated?
Yes, Chief. So we had a combination of live and virtual. So we utilized the 25th Space Range RCLE, or Range Closed Loop Environment, which is basically a satellite in a box. So how it worked for electromagnetic warfare, we had planners out in SFI who were integrating with all of our joint partners, trying to understand what the scheme of maneuver is, what effects needed to be put in place, when and where. And then that planning information was sent over to our players back here in Colorado Springs, and then we executed it. So it presented a very realistic and challenging scenario for our guys. I think one of the things we learned from this was that it's difficult. Electromagnetic warfare is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. It definitely takes very deliberate planning, very precise planning to ensure that the effects are in place when they're needed and on time. So our guys got a lot of experience putting those effects into place, working through some of the chaos, planning on the fly, making adjustments, and overall, I think it provided them a very realistic, representative environment of what could be expected.
I appreciate it. So you're on the planning side for both of you and Sergeant Tran. Now, Group Commander May, you said you were the deputy commander. Now, were you on the blue player or were you on the exercise red team or white cell?
So I was a blue player, and for me, it was about how I led the teams to plan and execute their operations. So from my side, it was about building the right battle rhythm processes and ensuring that our planning teams were linked in with the other components that were playing in particular, as we were working with the Joint Force Air Component Commander and their staff. And in particular, a lot of our focus was on how we ensured that space capabilities were maintained, working closely with US Space Force elements and US Space Command. But it was also in the planning and execution of counter space operations. And I think that's one of the key value adds that we provide here from a Space Forces Indo-Pac. We are integrated into what US Indo-Pacific Command planning and requirements. So we know what needs to occur with the scheme of manoeuvre at what given time and tempo. And then we can provide that clear planning and advice to the units to execute. The key to that is ensuring that we do enable mission command, that we're here to understand the environment, get clear command intent, provide those mission type orders, and then enable the units out there to execute and use their initiative to do it, but they're doing it inside of a disciplined approach to planning.
So to do all that work that you just described, I believe we had some space planning teams that we've kind of request for forces, if you will, to send out. Can you talk about what? So you have your standard standing staff that's out there. So when we say SFI, it's funny. I had to look at that when I was preparing for today. Space Forces Indo-PACOM, right? That's the short for that? That's like B9 for Pennsylvania. That's just much easier to say. So SFI, Space Forces Indo-PACOM. So you have your standard SFI staff, but I think you kind of I don't know. I don't like to say the word surge, but you definitely grew with requests for forces. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Space Forces Indo-Pacific. So I think the idea is we look at distributed operations. So here we are within the Indo-Pacific environment. It enables us to know what's going on with the planning, with the operational planning. We have a core planning staff, and we are given the responsibility by the Commander Indo-Pacific as the Joint Force Space Component, which gives us incredible responsibility to bring the other components into understanding and coordinating space operations using other service capabilities as well. But to do that, we have to bring dedicated, experienced planning teams in. And I know Delta 3 has some significant capability that they provided to us from planners, and then across from all deltas and Space Systems Command, brought staff out here for space planning teams that we were able to immediately place into core positions and give us that depth of planning and execution and knowledge that we needed. And that was particularly pertinent because during the exercise, we also had a change of command ceremony, and a whole range of our permanent staff was supporting that. So all the staff that came out were able to give us that depth that we needed during that event as well, which is an excellent event to attend, but we had to have continuity of operations as well.
So I'm sorry, just to kind of read back. So was that with General Matzler and General De Niro? Did the change of command in the middle of the exercise?
Yes, that's right. And
that's awesome.
So we were farewelling one outstanding commander and bringing a new commander on. And that's for him, he was really keen to learn what was going on in the exercise, so wanted to be involved. But at the same time, we're transitioning between command posts and field training exercises, so making sure that he had the appropriate involvement in the exercise. But it was great to see that he was very interested.
So, sir, you talked about the authorities that you receive as a component to Indo-PACOM from the Indo-PACOM commander. I think it's Admiral Paparo, who's out there, and you talked about integrating from all the joint partners that are there. What about on this was also an allied kind of a coalition exercise as well, right? So can you talk a little bit about what was that interaction from your vantage point as a deputy commander with our allies and partners that participated in the exercise?
Yeah, for this particular exercise, it was mainly US with Allied force integration. So for people like myself who are embedded in a US position, and then because other allies had major exercises on at the same time as well. But it enabled us to surge capabilities into the theatre and also to, from my perspective, be able to bring an allied perspective to the game, and also to have the team, when we're looking at planning, think about the capabilities that allies and partners bring, think about the access that they also bring, and as well as working as allies and partners, what that means to deterrence in particular throughout the region. But critical to that as well is ensuring that we have a means of shared data and being able to bring in feeds from the allies and partners, as well as being able to send feeds out to them so that we all have a shared understanding of what's going on. So with this exercise in particular, it was more about the embedded allies who were, particularly from the space side of the house, who were doing the jobs day to day, being able to provide those different perspectives to the US teams.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. Hey, Colonel Steingold, as the exercise director, as the planning and you kicked off and all the things that were done left of StartX, what were you and the team, what were some of the takeaways that you were hoping that the participants like Group Captain May and the hundreds of other Guardians and team members, the thousands, I guess, that, from across the joint and coalition force, what were you hoping that some of the takeaways would have been from an objective perspective, from a learning objective?
Chief, I think it's important to note that while our space exercise, Resolute Space, was the point where we're most integrated with the team, this overarching exercise incorporated U.S. Transcom, Pacific Air Forces, Air Combat Command, as well as allies and partners from across the U.S. Indo-Pacific. And so one of the big takeaways from this was just to prove to ourselves and to prove to our allies and partners, as well as our joint partners, how integral space is to joint warfighting. And so we wanted to design an exercise in conjunction with our terrestrial warfighters, if you would, that was going to highlight that experience to get space warfighters into this environment of planning and then execution as a fledgling service. So 5 years old as a service, it's exposure to our teammates as much as we can. So that was pretty much a significant point, I think, that we did throughout the planning cycles. And it was, Sergeant Tran, Sergeant Matheny just did an incredible job carrying that water in all of the planning, which is pretty unique from a planner perspective, having come from a sister service and doing a lot of planning on other exercises. To see young Guardians in the enlisted ranks just leading and spearheading some of that planning was extremely impressive, and I'm proud of them.
Hey, thanks for that, sir. I appreciate it. So, you talked about this was an exercise of exercises, if you will. So, and you talked about, our the enlisted corps, the enlisted Guardians that you had on the team integrating. Was that across? So I think we had, Resolute Reef Pack on the Air Force side, Bamboo Eagle, Emerald Warrior, Mobility Guardian. So there was several of them. So Sergeant Tran, did you interact with the planners for all those different exercises to sync up what you guys were trying to do for Resolute Space?
Yes, sir. So I think when I look back at it, I think it was I personally spent about 120 plus days TDY this calendar year alone, going back and forth between Hurlburt in Florida and out to Nellis in Vegas, and then in the Springs, and then to Hawaii. And yes, it was truly interesting trying to bridge the gap between all of these different warfighting domains, considering, you have your air and you have your space, but you also have your cyber warfighting domain. And trying to bridge a bit of that language gap, letting people understand, like, hey, air community, this is what space enables for you and everyone around us. And then, in turn, also trying to translate that there's nothing in space that isn't cyber. And so how do we make all of these different scenarios and timelines make sense? Definitely our gargantuan task, but made a lot of really good connections that are going to be long-lasting from here on out.
Wow. So, hey, Jeff, for you, from a planning perspective, you talked about all the days Sergeant Tran was TDY. When did you initially get involved in the planning for Resolute Space? Like, how many months ago?
Chief, I got involved pretty much day one. Colonel Steingold, maybe you can correct me on this, but I believe it was around October of 2024 was when we had our first planning meeting over in Schriever, trying to understand what this exercise reefer pack and Resolute Space and how we were going to marry the two exercises together. So pretty much since day one, I've been with the team planning. And I have to say, like, the planning portion was probably some of the most fun I think I've had in my career so far. I think Sergeant Tran hit it right on the money there. Just the integrating with air players and Navy and Army guys. It was fantastic to preach the good word of space and to slowly educate them on what space provides, why it's important, how we are an enhancer, an enabler. And as we went through these various planning conferences over 6 months, watching the rest of the Joint Force understand, like, hey, space is here. Space has a huge part to play in our execution and our success. And it was just fantastic to watch the learning and the growing happen. And as we incorporated more people into these planning events, watching, young enlisted, young officers kind of take the reins, take ownership of their respective mission sets and really, do wonderful planning, wonderful integration, making this all make sense so everybody's speaking the same language. It was really impressive to watch.
When we had a chance to speak in the pre-brief that several of you gave me when I was still in the Pentagon, I think you did it from Herbert Field when you were down there. We had talked about, looking at, what were the warfighting, the lexicon, the documents, right? The CONOPS that we had done as a service. So, for example, we talked about the Space Warfighting Framework and its guide for planners. So, were you able to take a look at what we've written down as far as doctrine, lexicon, terminology, philosophy? Was it, and then that came out later because you started planning way before that document came out, but from a planning perspective, were you able to look at that and say, wow, this is exactly makes sense, or we're maybe missing something? Did we learn anything from that after we go through the exercise, what we've written, did it kind of align?
I would say yes, it was foundational. However, when you're in it and you're working 12 to 16 hours a day for weeks at a time with these teams, like, you can never plan for it all. Yeah. Like, I remember I had spent weeks with my ECG where we were running through some of these drills of here's the inject, here's how we think is going to play out. But when it came to game time, the blue players are always going to surprise you. And they surely did. And I'll give you an example.
Okay.
From the cyber side, we were working this one inject. And I thought that I had written it in a way that was clear cut. I was like, surely, we all know this. We're going to talk about the satellite control network. And if XYZ happened to it, what would you do? They came completely left field where they were like, oh, one of our COAs, we can hand crank these. And that, I didn't even account for that whatsoever. And having to brief that up and we were able to actually, while we were out in Hawaii, go and coordinate something with Mission Delta 31 and 22 SOPs to get our cyber players out there to the actual antenna, and lo and behold, there actually is a capability to hand crank an entire antenna.
Wow.
And so I never foresaw that coming at all. But
yeah, I love that story, right? Because that kind of shows the ingenuity, thinking outside the box, right, that our Guardians bring to the fight, because that's what we need. You know, one of the things, and we all know this, right, when we talk about critically thinking and talking about what are the attributes of a Guardian, when you talk about space-minded warfighter, is we can't rely on a checklist, right? So if the checklist says, well, hey, you know, it doesn't have the note on it about see hand crank, right? But it's going to be the Guardians to understand that, no, hey, well, there's a crank out there. It's not on the checklist, but I know it's there. Maybe we can just do that. And that's the amazing thing about where these exercises, you know, obviously we want them to show where we have challenges and pain points, but really when the surprises come through and then you find those, you know, motivating diamonds in the rough, and like, wow, we are really, when you talk about what is our readiness, what's our preparedness today to dominate our domain, right, to execute the mission. Those are great stories because it makes you feel, man, I can go to sleep tonight and
yes.
I could feel safe. Now, does that mean we don't have work to do? We absolutely have work to do. And I'm sure we got a lot of lessons learned and vulnerabilities and things that we won't talk about here specifically. But that's the whole purpose of the exercise. So thanks for that. That's a great vignette. I love it. I love it. They thwarted you. You tried. That's right. You thought you were going to stump them. They showed you.
But they said, we're going to get it done.
Yeah.
We're going to provide this capability, even if we have to do 24-hour ops sitting inside of this radome. We're going to get it done.
I love it. Hey, so Group Commander May, what was the, you know, for you, kind of working the exercise as a Blue Force? What was the epoch? What was the year? Is it current year, 10 years? What was when you were playing for a Blue Force, Red Force?
Yeah, so I appreciate you calling me a group commander, but it's group captain.
Oh, sorry, group captain.
Captain, I apologize.
No, that's all right. We look at it from a point of view of what capabilities we have now and potentially out to a couple of years as well, as we think about the capabilities that we have coming online very soon. We want to test and play, in particular in command post exercises. We want to make sure that we can get a sense of how we might integrate those capabilities into our operations. So that's always very useful. But fundamentally, it is about how we can operate today.
You know, you had spoken earlier about the planning that you were doing and, you know, about, you know, protecting the capabilities that we provide to the Joint Force to make them more lethal, you know, how we enable them, if you will. And that's one of the Space Force truths, right, that General Salson talks about, is that, you know, the service, we have to be able to protect and defend the capabilities that we have, that we provide to make the Joint Force more lethal. But then there's another truth that talks about we also have to be able to deny the adversary the abilities to leverage the domain to their advantage. And I think you talked a little bit about that was that on the space control side? So just curious from your perspective, when you look about the Space Force truth and things we say we need to do as a service, from a Blue Force deputy commander, when you were planning and how you looked at the objectives, were you kind of going across both those kind of truths, if you will?
Yeah, that's right. You always need to look at what offensively you can do and what defensively you can do. If you don't incorporate both, then you're going to be in trouble, because all your planning effort, and this is something that we had to consider all the way through the exercise, is how do we protect what we have? How do we work with US Space Command for all those Space Command assets that are in theatre? What is it that Space Forces Indo-Pacific could do to support that? But not only just us, what is it that the other services can do to protect and defend? And in particular, that plays out with integrated air and missile defence. when we think about our contribution, which is significant to missile warning at this particular time, if air is pushing out to different locations with agile basing, have they considered missile warning? And it's nice to have missile defence, but if you don't have that, then that's going to be potentially problematic. Then, separate to that, we need to look at how we protect and defend what we have on orbit, which may also be conducting operations terrestrially to deter or to deny an advantage to the adversary in being able to conduct operations. And then that preserves and defends our space layer as well.
Thanks. Because we talk about how, to your point, how integral space capabilities are, and that constant kind of message, not only internally but externally. And I think that's such an important part of the service components that we have spread across, into the combatant commands, to help them think through exactly what you just outlined. And I think that's been a big success as a service to be able to stand up in the initial stages of Space Forces Indo-Pacific. Right now we have CENTCOM, we have EUCOM, and that's we have Space Forces Korea and Japan. So that's really important because that's such a great perspective to bring. Hey, Colonel Steingold. So when you talked about some of the objectives, right? You talked about environmental monitoring, talked about PNT, nav warfare. Was there also, one of the things, was there also a thought at looking at assured access to space, any kind of rapid launch capability that did we look at for the exercise?
We sure did, Chief. We had the opportunity to work with our space systems command partners who are very much spearheading the effort for tactically responsive space capabilities and the ability to integrate quickly with rapid launch to reconstitute space in the event that we need to increase our space domain awareness or other capabilities on orbit. And so the opportunity to work with SFC in conjunction with the U.S. Space Command as well as Space Operation Command teammates, so spanning multiple echelons and multiple organizations across the Space Force, gave us the ability to come together and do some planning towards that as well, leading towards a near-term future launch coming up for the U.S. Space Force. So it was a pretty exciting opportunity to get after that and to see our Guardians leaning into something different and definitely a game changer.
Yeah, I know that because we talk about that quite a bit as the criticality of the space industry for the nation and how vital our spaceports are, or if you will, but assured access to space at the timing and tempo that we need as a nation to be responsive is really, really important. Talk about resiliency and everything else. So I'm glad because I thought we had talked about including that in the exercise, and I know that's something we definitely want to make sure that we continue to kind of work through. And we've had a couple of successful events already within the Space Force that we've done that. So that's awesome. Hey, Jeff, I was going to ask you, so, stepping back now that the exercise is over, the TDYs have ended, travel vouchers filed. What's your assessment? So stepping back, like, what's your takeaway from your perspective, and what is something that maybe you learned that was surprising to you?
Yeah, so my assessment would be, I think we're ready. Definitely still have some work to do, but I think if push comes to shove and the service needs to go and support the combatant commands, I think the service is ready. I think one thing that surprised me during the planning and execution for Resolute Space was all the participants willing to step out of their comfort zone and tackle problems that may not necessarily be in their mission set. We had EW guys, electromagnetic warfare guys, tackling missile warning problems. We had some guys from Force Ops tackling COMRO. We had everybody really working outside of their normal day-to-day mission areas, trying to get after these really large and difficult problems. And while, yes, it was tough and, there was plenty of discussion and maybe some arguments during planning and even execution. But I think what was really cool is that, you have these individuals that may not have experience doing operational planning or thinking about ComRel from SFI's and Spacecom's perspective, but coming up with really unique solutions of how do we do this coordination? How do we do this planning? And ultimately, how do we execute this? So I think, if anything, the service showed that if the bill comes due, we have Guardians that are ready to not only conduct their mission areas, but they're willing to step outside of their comfort zone, tackle difficult problems, and come up with some very unique solutions, like Sergeant Tran's example of the hand crank, right? They're willing to think outside the box to get the job done and to perpetuate this mission set as well as our sister service mission set forward, and do so in a way that is, I think, unique to Space Force in some regards, but more importantly, to do it in a way that speaks to the Joint Force and speaks to commanders and gets the mission accomplished.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. From all the work and planning you did during the exercise execution of it, where were you physically during execution?
I was physically at SFI. I was in the Kenny trailers with Colonel Steingold and Group Captain May and the rest of the team. And my job, I was the cell for the exercise. So I took it upon myself to basically be the eyes and ears, if you will, for the ECG. So I would walk around to all the different areas. I would call back to the home stations, and I would try and gather as much data as I could pertaining to execution, exercise, like where we were in time, anything that had to deal with the injects, and then try and piece together in real time, like, okay, here's the problem, here's how I think we can get after it, how do you want to proceed?
Speaking of like where Guardians physically are, so Group Captain May, a question for you on, and I spoke about this during my keynote yesterday here at AFA, that the application of space power has allowed us to have a unique force presentation model, in that our ability to project combat power can be done from windowless rooms across the world. Like, you don't have to necessarily be in the physical AOR that you're trying to provide impacts to. So, sir, from your perspective, for the forces that were, given to you for the effects through either directly presented to INDOPACOM or that were, presented through U.S. Space Command, what is, some thoughts from you on the fact that you are relying on Guardians to provide you capabilities to meet your objectives, and they may have been in Colorado, they may have been in California, they may have been in, in the UK, but they weren't necessarily physically in INDOPACOM.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation as we move forward on what the model is going to be for that, and each combatant command out there will have a different answer to that. And I think that's where we need to think about is what is right for that particular combatant command. In our particular environment in the Indo-Pacific, it is an incredibly large area. So we do rely a lot on remote capabilities, and we rely a lot on the Delta commanders to have an ongoing relationship with the units that are out there. From our perspective, Space Forces Indo-Pacific is the link into INDOPACOM. So our commander is the one voice for space in the theatre. So that is the person that Admiral Paparo goes to and says what's going on in the space domain. And that can be everything from what's going on orbit to what's happening terrestrially. So our commander has to know that. So from our perspective, we need the right capabilities, the right people, the right positions in place that are able to reach out effectively and answer those questions. Not own everything. We don't have to own everything. We just need to have the mechanisms in place, the battle rhythm structures in place that enable us to achieve that for Admiral Paparo. And I think during the exercise, we made a significant transition from being a COM Space 4 Indo-Pacific to a Joint Force Space Component Command, where we really started to understand the other service requirements, the other service capabilities, and how we integrate all of those, and Space Command's capabilities as a combatant command in and of itself, and how we bring all of that together to enable General Denaro now to be that one voice for space in the theatre.
Hey, that's a great takeaway perspective from the exercise. Because I talk a lot about the uniqueness of how, as Guardians and as a service, provide those forces and project power. And, to your point, sir, thinking through that, what is the right model, but also being comfortable and understand that you may not be able to eye to eye maybe look at somebody, but know with confidence that when you need those effects, that the Guardians are going to deliver regardless of physically where they are. But if you have the right people on the team there that can ask the questions, do the analysis, and request the effects, that the Space Force will be able to deliver. And yeah, I think, as we go through and build out the service components, right, there is the value added of having Guardians on the ground around the table with the combatant commanders. But like you said, you don't have to own everything, right? You just have to have the right people who can ask the right questions at the right time to get the effects. And I think that's, all services have myriads of capabilities that are very, similar. You don't have to be in the theater, but the preponderance, I think, of the Space Forces and our ability to do that, it just makes us, as in addition to our small size, but that very unique working through that. So that's a great takeaway that you got that. So I'm going to ask you, Group Captain May, so as Colonel Steingold and the team worked to deliver you a scenario that maybe challenged you, maybe tried to blunt you on some of your actions, what did you think overall of the exercise? Was it something? Did you walk away kind of sweat on your brow, saying, "Man, that was really hard"? Did we kind of challenge you in a way that helped you and the team out there grow?
Yeah, Colonel Steingold was a pain in my butt the whole time, but apart from that, and he was right there at me, right next door to me. Anyway, it was a great opportunity because we, as he was transitioning into the DCOM here, it provided us an excellent opportunity to train and think about and ask. And I could ask him directly the right sort of questions and seek the right sort of training outcomes for the team. And I couldn't be more proud of the team out here and all of those that came to support us, because one of the things that I wanted to get out of it was that real integration between operations and intelligence, and that understanding about what each does and the inputs that they provide to each other. And every day when I went in to do, operations and intelligence briefs or a commander's decision board, I could see that they had worked together closely to be able to give the information that I needed at the right time. And having young Guardians standing up there briefing, first time they've been in the theatre, first time that they've given a brief of this particular nature, was really impressive to watch. And, in particular, the intelligence staff that came out to support us, I thought they did an amazing job. And we'll probably go back with a greater understanding of what this theatre is all about. So from that perspective, really pleased with the outcomes. We're able to do a command post exercise, rolling down to field training exercises, rolling down to a really tailored and bespoke exercise that was looking at joint or domain operations. So it gave us great variety, and it also provided the right sort of challenges to work through some of the problems that we needed to do.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So, Ashlyn, where physically were you? So, were you in Hawaii as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I was out in the Kenny trailers with the team.
So, from your stepping back and your overarching kind of assessment and what you took away from Resolute Space as a whole, what are your thoughts?
I can't say it any more eloquently than the team already has, but I would agree that we do have our work cut out for us. But one of the areas that I personally took away from was we owe it to ourselves and to our team and to the service to do our due diligence, to sit down, be vulnerable, and say, hey, I may not understand this mission area. I recognize a lot of us, we have our niche groups and the missions that we work on that we know really, really well, but we have to bridge that gap, to say, yes, I'm in the Space Force, but I don't actually know how GPS works, and allow that time for me to go over there and sit down and ask the questions and not feel stupid for that. Be vulnerable and then have that cross communication. I think the takeaway is that I want to encourage my fellow cyber guardians to do that, but also encourage the space community, the intel community to want to have that as well, because it's everything. Yeah. That connection is everything, and if we must do that moving forward.
All right, thanks. Colonel Steingold, two questions for you. One is your overarching assessment, right, as the exercise director. And now you're the deputy commander out there in the PACOM, but if okay, so we completed Resolute Space. What's the next big exercise? Do we know when and where and what that's going to be?
Yeah, Chief, and hopefully I'm not necessarily in charge of that one. Doing our large scale live virtual constructive exercise for the U.S. Space Force in conjunction with the Pacific Air Forces, as well as our Air Mobility Command partners from Hollywood to Bollywood and up to 38,000 kilometers. It was definitely a challenge for us, but we're going to keep doing it. And sometimes it's a fact that not just in the Indo-PACOM AOR, but the United States military, alongside our allies and partners, are continuously performing exercises and training just to ensure interoperability. So you ask when the next one is, it's like happening right now. It's constantly going on, Chief. But in terms of these types of exercises where we get in and we do this significant planning efforts, usually we're keenly focused on the summertime exercises. I think that gives us just a kind of a battle rhythm to get into, but we're constantly exercising throughout, and it's also at every echelon. So when I say that, it's command and control is going. We'll go through certain exercises we call command post exercises. You'll bring in live forces for those field training exercises. And then even we're constantly doing tabletop exercises just to talk things out amongst whether it's a command post or with our allies and partners, just to see are our plans viable, are our plans integrated, and are our plans executable. So so having said that, with the exercise in mind, coming over and taking on this task in the Indo-PACOM AOR in support of General Denaro as his deputy. Alongside Group Captain May, who did okay during the exercise. We gave him a passing grade. Amazing what he's done. From his ability to bring what he has in his repertoire from his service in Australia to bring that as a teammate into the United States military and specifically here Space Forces Indo-PAC. Just absolutely game-changing when it comes to our improving our skill sets and how we think and how we act. So it's incredible to have him as a partner. But as we move forward in Space Forces Indo-PAC, we're even younger than the service, of course, right? Just a couple of years old. We're only on our second commander, and that was, as Daryl said, just turned over this summer. And I think that the team said it. We definitely have our work cut out for us as a service component to represent our service to the U.S. Indo-PACOM commander, as well as to synchronize all the effects and work together with our joint partners to ensure that what we learned during exercise Resolute Space and Resolute Forces Pacific actually gets, we actually make those lessons learned, truly learned and integrated. And that's the big challenge I think we have before us. And that's everything from how we do our staff activities and planning to actually commanding and controlling at this echelon, and then ensuring that our Guardians know exactly what they need to do in support of the joint warfighter and in space to protect and defend our own assets so that we can fight and win if necessary.
Hey, thanks, sir. I appreciate that perspective. One of the other things I talked about yesterday was, when you look at Space Force Doctrine Document 1, and we kind of talk about there's two the kind of forces that we have within the Space Force. We have the institutional forces and the operational forces. And, the nuance, we call them operational forces like INSPOC, right, that represent, or to the service components. But even when you talk about STARCOM or SSC, because both those organizations were heavily involved, right? Because you talked about augmentation that came out from SSC, and you talk about, for example, Delta 11 in the aggressor forces and all the planning from, maybe Delta 10 or some of the deltas. When you step back and listen to a conversation like this, whether you're in the institutional bucket or the operational bucket, it's all operations. You just can't get away from it, right? I mean, every Guardian is an operator. And no matter what your role is, whatever you think you do on a day-to-day basis, we all have to do it as Guardians from the perspective of mission area success in operations. And I think that's, a unique part of our culture as a Space Force. And listening to this discussion today, and in my head thinking about the weight of effort from across the Space Force, from all different field commands, all different echelons, all different squadrons and organizations. It's about operations. It's about making us more lethal. It's helping us be agile and learn. So, with that, I just want to thank all of you, right, for the months of hard work and dedication, the attention to detail, making sure that, coordinating, collaborating, telling the Space Force story, trying to make sure that, whatever service, whatever uniform the service members wear, whatever flag they had on their shoulder, that it was in an environment that enabled them to learn and grow and become more lethal and more integrated. And I think that's really, really important. And I'm excited. I don't think I haven't had the official outbrief from Resolute Space yet, but I'm excited to kind of get that. And then, as Colonel Steingold talked about, right, this is an ever evolving. It's occurring all the time at different levels and echelons. But I look forward to the next opportunity at this large scale as a service that we can, kind of show and prove not only to ourselves, but to our allies and partners and joint brothers and sisters that the Space Force is here and that we can deliver when we have to. So everyone, again, thank you very much for your time today. This has really been educational and inspiring. Listen about how amazing it was. And again, I appreciate for our friends that are in Hawaii getting up early today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your sunny day, and I hope in Colorado the cold and kind of moist weather goes by and the sun comes out. Like in Colorado, you never know what you're going to get. But teammates, thanks for everything you're doing. I really do appreciate. Sorry we're not able to kind of see you face to face here at AFA here in the National Harbor, but I look forward to getting a chance to seeing all of you again very soon. So with that, we're going to sign out of this Perigee podcast. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Semper Supra.